tell, do you see the road? I'm out to my soul into the sides whenever the smoke clear out of my face and my picture perfect.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 13th part of, What If Harry Potter Meets High School DxD. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of Asian Lion Heart 310 on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Potter Manor, England, Wizarding World. Once again, the whole Order of the Phoenix minus Alastor who left were reunited at Potter Manor to discuss the same topics that months ago. The first one being Voldemort and his cronies. The second being the missing Potter child, Harry. James and Lily were sitting not too far from Albus on his right side along with Minerva, Fundungus and some other members, while on the left side of the old wizard were the Weasley patriarchs and some other people. All of them knew of Alastor's departure and what Amelia Bones ordered to her Aurors, the arrest of the Order's members if they dared to cause more trouble with Japan people. Of course, Albus also revealed that Sirius had told the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement of who were part of Dumbledore's group of vigilantes, and many voiced their anger at what Lord Black did, especially James. Lily, however, was glad that Alastor left and Amelia was keeping an eye on Albus, as the last thing she wanted was to be at war with Japan, who were known as among the best fighters of the world. She had strongly been against sending people on Japan's grounds, but Albus, being the old fool he was, did it regardless. In the end, only 3 people out of 9 came back from their missions, but the survivors were now at St. Mungo's, where they would spend the last years of their life, as they were now unstable due to trauma. Also, Albus told them of the message the Japanese government sent them through one of the 3 men: intrude in our grounds again and you will face our wrath. And of course, those words caused a wave of panic through the members of the Order. Some even voiced what they had in mind regarding Albus' stupid idea of sending people there in the first place. Lily had been strongly against Albus' decision, and now she had the confirmation that a war could stand ahead of them if the old wizard dismissed the warning and sent more people there. Minerva McGonagall was also against the headmaster, as she too didn't want it to fight against Japan wizards. What do we do now, Albus? Fundungus began to say gruffly before adding, tell me you won't send more people there, because if you do, I quit the Order. James looked ready to say something to the thief when Dumbledore released a deep sigh, catching their attention. The old wizard took his time as he rubbed his eyes with his fingers. Around him, all members were watching him, waiting for his answer. Then Albus raised his head, looking at them through his glasses before opening his mouth to say in a deep tone, from now on, we must keep our heads down. I don't want anyone going in Japan. We are already a few to stand against Voldemort, and we don't want to be even fewer. Many voiced their agreements, and some were even sighing in relief. Among them were Lily and Minerva. However, there were some who were in total disagreement with the headmaster. Albus, are you serious? Harry might be in Japan as we're talking. We cannot just back down. James hissed to the old wizard with disbelief clear on his face before he received a strong punch from his wife right on the shoulder. We cannot let the poor dear in such a barbaric country. Molly screeched in her usual bossy tone that caused many to wince in fright for their audition, and among them was Arthur Weasley, Molly's husband. While I wholeheartedly agree on this, I'm afraid I can't do much, or else Amelia would try to arrest us to avoid a conflict with Japan, Albus replied in a soft tone filled with disappointment. He really wanted Harry to be found so he could mold him into the perfect weapon against Voldemort, as he should have been now if Albus hadn't made the biggest mistake of his life, choosing the wrong twin. Dumbledore also wanted to find Harry so he could extract the Deathly Hallows from the boy, and so becoming the new MSTR of death and being immortal in addition. Then what can we do? James asked the old man in despair. Ever since he learned that Harry was the true vanquisher of Voldemort, you know who, or he who must not be named, the patriarch of House Potter, tried his best to find his missing son. He had different reasons for doing so. The first one was particularly to take back some of the lordships he should have claimed in the first place: Gryffindor, Emrys, and Peverell. The second was making his son drop the lordships of House Lefay, Slytherin and Ravenclaw. The first two because they were associated with dark families, and the last one because it belonged to his wife personally. He wants it for more prestige. He had no love for his other son and only wanted him back to gain more money and fame, unlike his wife, Lily, who wanted to find Harry to apologize for abandoning him to the Dursleys many years ago. Back to present, Albus rubbed his beard, deep in thought while humming loudly. The rest of the people present were glancing at each other, wondering what would be their next actions. After a moment of silence almost, Dumbledore reopened his eyes to look back at the gathered people around him before saying in a firm tone, "I will charge Severus to keep an ear on Voldemort's next plans. From what I heard, there is currently a Death Eater in Japan looking for Harry. If the boy is found, then Severus will tell us and we will take actions." They all knew that part, as Albus told them that it was the same Death Eater that warned the Japan government of the searching party's arrival and caused them to be executed/traumatized. In reward of his action, she had been allowed to stay as long as she didn't cause trouble during her stay. James reluctantly nodded while grumbling something under his breath as he glared at the ceiling. Lily shot her husband a dangerous glare that could possibly melt eyes before looking back at Albus. Now that the matter of Harry was over, they now had to discuss about what to do with Voldemort's recent attacks in Diagon Alley and his recent alliances with the Giants. Elsewhere, Japan. Harry was walking peacefully through the park toward his next destination, Kuo Academy. It hadn't been long since his tussle with Great Red, and so far, he grew to appreciate the Apocalypse Dragon. How? Because Great Red would visit him during his dreams and the two would discuss of many things. A part of gaining a new friend and rival, Harry gained many other things after his battle with the Red Dragon. His battle had been told to every creatures of the supernatural world and, thanks to this, his popularity grew a lot. Odin himself had sent him a message of congratulations. In addition, the vampires from Carmilla and Teep's factions brought a lot more of his BLD lollipops, and the leaders themselves wrote to him, stating that if they needed anything from them, he just had to ask. In return, Harry humbly asked them to not associate with the wizard Voldemort or any other wand users from Great Britain, to which they wholeheartedly agreed, as apparently, they had knowledge of the wizarding world and their prejudices. He even menaced them to not give them more lollipops if they keep fighting each other. Least to say that the missives he received from the vampire leaders were amusing. Even Ophis cracked a snicker, and it was hard to make her laugh. Regulus, the Nemean lion he fought against some time ago, also became even more loyal to him. Why? Because of his new position and his new name, Arslan, the King of Lions. Serorg also became a close friend of his, and it wasn't rare to see the two of them speaking to each other through phones. Also, he discovered that his dragon form hadn't altered his normal figure, as he still got his black hair. When he asked his aunts Muerte and Destiny and Mom Esh why, they simply answered that it was a better way to hide himself from the wizards. After all, who would think that Harry, a black-haired young man, would be Arslan, the white celestial dragon? Back to present, Harry was slowly making his way toward Kuo Academy when he felt that someone was stalking him from somewhere behind him. Glancing behind without fully turning his head, he swore to have seen a strange black-cloaked figure quickly hiding behind a tree. Frowning, the black-haired young man mentally decided to go see his friends from the Occult Research Club once he reached the academy. For now, he would act as if he hadn't seen the guy/gal as he resumed his trip toward Kuo Academy without a care in the world. As he reached the school's entrance, he paused in his walk to quickly look behind him, as expected whoever was following him was not there anymore or was simply hiding. Sighing, Harry turned around to pass through the academy's entrance, where he was instantly greeted by the female population as they stopped what they were doing to look at him. "It's Harry-san. The Black King is here. Marry me, Harry-san." Along with that, the black-haired young lord could hear the comments from the male population, which were everything but nice in his opinion. OSHT. Here we go again. Why can't he die? If him and Kiba-san weren't here, we would have girlfriends already. Rolling his eyes in both amusement and annoyance, Harry made his way back toward the Occult Research Club before knocking on the wooden door. He didn't have classes before the next hour, so he was free to go see some of his friends first. After a few seconds, someone opened and Harry could see it was none other than Kiba, Rias' knight. "Hey Harry," the blonde young man greeted him in a friendly manner while allowing him to enter. "Kiba," Harry greeted the knight with a nod of his head before looking inside the room to see Akeno, Rias, Gasper and Zenobia. Harry Cohen, the black-haired queen greeted her lover before kissing him passionately on the lips, something he returned in kind. Zenobia and Gasper both blushed at the sight while Rias looked both amused and annoyed. After a few seconds of this, the redhead decided it was enough and loudly cleared her throat to catch their attentions. Instantly, Akeno released her boyfriend before looking at her king with a pout on her face as she was clearly enjoying herself. Harry, meanwhile, was also shooting a small glare toward the Gremory heiress but then smiled evilly as he had a small idea of vengeance. The smirk hadn't go unnoticed as Rias shivered slightly at the sight of it but brushed it aside to ask in a friendly manner, "What can we do for you, Harry?" "Someone had been stalking me ever since I entered the park," the young lord bluntly admitted to the Gremory girl. At those words, everyone stared at him as their attention had been caught by that simple statement. "Did you see who it was?" Rias asked him in a serious tone as she looked at him with narrowed eyes. "No, but I managed to see a black cloak," Harry answered with some frustration as he growled a bit. "Do you think it is one of those Death Eaters from England or one of the Order of the Phoenix?" Akeno asked him with narrowed eyes. The only mention of Voldemort's followers bring a scowl on everyone's face. They hated anything taking part of the wizarding world. "It might be I fell a great darkness from under the cloak, maybe the dark mark," Harry replied with a growl before saying in a serious tone. "We must catch whoever it is, maybe we might got something interesting." Kiba, Zenobia, Gasper, Akeno and Rias all nodded in agreement with evil smirks at those words. Without warning, the Gremory girl called out her familiar, whose name was yet to be known, before giving her simple order. "I want you to stay around Harry for the rest of the day. If you see someone in a dark cloak following him, report back to me." The bat nodded in determination before disappearing. However, Harry could clearly detect the bat's presence somewhere. Akeno, once the bat was out of sight, licked her lips as her eyes swiftly went toward her lover before she literally lunged at him. "Akeno, what th-? Harry began to ask in surprise, totally unprepared by the sudden action, but then was interrupted by Akeno's lips crashing into his. Blinking, the young lord internally shrugged before returning the kiss in full force while wrapping his arms around her waist to pull the girl closer. At this sight, Zenobia, Rias, Gasper and Kiba all blushed madly and some even tried to hide their red faces. "Get a room, you two," Rias loudly remarked to the kissers as she turned her head away from them. Shooting her a sideway grin, Harry slowly pulled himself away from Akeno, who released a soft whine of protest as she wanted the kiss to continue. Chuckling at his girlfriend's antic, he gave her a little peck on the forehead before walking away toward the clubroom's entrance, but not before waving his right hand toward Rias. "I will see you later then, and don't worry Rias, it would be gone in a few minutes," Harry inquired to the Gremory heiress before quickly dashing away to avoid questions. Blinking, Rias stared at the wooden door where Harry disappeared, wondering what he meant by, "It would be gone in a few minutes." Zenobia, Gasper and Akeno turned their heads away from the door to stare at their king, only to see something unexpected. Zenobia snickered softly with her mouth hidden behind her hands while Akeno was laughing loudly with amusement. Kiba hid his mouth behind a hand to cover his own amusement at the sight while Gasper looked stunned by what he saw. Seeing the four's reactions, Rias frowned slightly as she wondered what had caused such hilarity, but one thing was sure, it couldn't be good as they seemed to laugh of her. "What are you laughing about?" the Gremory heiress asked them sternly as she crossed her arms under her large bust. "Nothing, Bucho." Zenobia and Kiba both replied at the same time while trying their best to hold their laughters. Gasper quickly looked away, no wanting to answer and angering his king. The same thing couldn't be said for Akeno, who would take every opportunity to make fun of her best friend and king. Era, you look good in blue, Bucho fufufu." At those words, Rias's world froze as she stared at her queen with nothing but shock and stupor before dashing toward the clubroom's bathroom where she looked at her reflection on the mirror. To her shock and horror, her hairs, which were usually a appealing crimson, were now aqua blue just like her eyes. While she had to admit the color matched her eyes, Rias was still furious that someone dared to change her hair's color without asking her first. And there was only one person who could have done such a thing, a person who left the clubroom not long ago with a devious smirk on his face. Growling deeply, Rias' eyes narrowed as she returned into the main room where Zenobia, Kiba, Akeno, and Gasper stood with an angered expression on her face. At the sight of her, 3 of the 4 winced in fright, as it wasn't every day that Rias would be angry. Hey Rias screamed loudly in anger while Akeno's laughers doubled in intensity. At the other side of the school, Harry was peacefully walking toward his class when he heard a loud cry echoing in the air. Hey Look like Rias noticed my little gift for her good. Harry commented to himself with a chuckle as he resumed his walk toward the classroom where Issei, Asia and himself had lessons to perform. The moment he entered the classroom, he was greeted by Issei and Asia, with the latter hugging in front of the whole class. Ignoring the last part, Harry hugged the blonde back. The whole academy by now knew that Harry saw Asia as a younger sister and was very protective of her. The perv trio learned it the hard way, especially Matsuda and Motohama, who had been beaten black and blue by a furious Harry. Since then, most of the boys tried to stay away from Asia as possible, as no one wanted to oppose Harry's anger. Onaizen, what did you do with Ria-senpai? Asia asked her brother figure with concern and a bit of curiosity. You must have done something big for her to scream like that, Issei remarked with a raised brow. Harry's answer was a dark grin filled with malice which sent shivers down the spines of those who saw it. Asia, who was confused, titled her head to the side, which earned some awe from the rest of the class. Don't concern yourself with this, I'm sure you will know later, Harry said to the former blonde nun with an affectionate pat on the head. Nodding at him, Asia went to sit next to Issei while himself took his place in front of the brown-haired perv. As he pulled his school stuff out of his bag, the teacher entered the class before greeting them. Konnichiwa everyone. Konnichiwa sensei, they all replied back respectfully except Issei, whose greetings sounded forced. Today we will start with, the man began to say before Harry glanced at the window standing next to him. He was still thinking about the guy/gal in black that was stalking him earlier and hoped that he would catch whoever it was. Internally, he hoped that it wasn't a Death Eater's, because if it was, shaking his head to get rid of those dark thoughts, the black-haired young lord's attention went back to the teacher as the man was starting his lesson of the day. Time skip. The sun was slowly declining in the sky when Harry made his way back to school. Like earlier in the day, he felt like someone was following him, and he had a strong suspicion that it was the same guy/gal from this morning. He then heard the faint sound of flapping wings and glanced to his left to see a familiar bat landing on a tree's branch. The two briefly stared at each other in the eyes before Harry nodded at it, or was it her? At the signal, the bat disappeared out of sight, surely to warn her MSTR of Harry's stalker. Knowing that he was followed and that Rias would need some time before coming here, Harry decided to stay around the park, walking like everything was normal. He also tried his best to not turn around to not alert his stalker that he knew that he had seen him, her. After a few seconds, the young lord found a nice white bench near a small pool of water and sat on it before pulling out a book from his bag to read. Of course, he wasn't about to read it but to lure his stalker into thinking that he was reading. He had also made sure to contain a big part of his aura and only show a small fraction of it. How big? Enough to be seen as someone a little more powerful than Dumbledore or Voldemort. Speaking of the stalker, he was hiding behind a tree with his eyes locked on his victim. This morning, he left the hotel he resided in to look out for the Potter BRT, and after 2 hours of research, he found a young man with black hair and emerald green eyes walking in a park. He had thought, at first, that it was James, but there were a lot of differences between Lord Potter and the young man. First, James wasn't muscular like this stranger. Second, he didn't have green eyes. There was only one explanation at this: it was the missing Potter and the supposed vanquisher of his MSTR. He had followed the young man for a long time, but he had to stop when the latter entered a school full of muggles. The Death Eater decided to stick around while keeping an eye on the school's entrance in case the Potter BRT left. He wanted to find where the BRT lived so he could give an address to his lord, and right now, he was a bit annoyed at being forced to stay there as the BRT read a book. He was so focused on his prey that he didn't notice the people currently standing behind him with glares. It was the entire occult research club: Zenobia, Akeno, Gasper, Rosweiss, Asia, Kaneko, Issei, Kiba, and of course Rias herself, along with the student council. The two kings glanced at each other before nodding in determination. Without warning, they released all a bit of their auras, which caused the Death Eater to turn around when he felt a strong killing attend coming from behind him with a pale face. However, the moment the Death Eater turned around to face the group, he sneered at them with disgust. "Get out of here, stupid muggles, trash," he snarled at them as he pulled out his wand. However, to his surprise, none of them blinked as he pointed his wand at them and instead seemed more amused than anything. Rias, without turned her eyes away from the man, opened her mouth to say a simple word. Kaneko. At the mention of her name, the white-haired Nekasha dashed forward with a speed that shocked the Death Eater, who didn't have the time to react when a strong punch aimed at his gut caused him to gasp in shock and pain. Akeno, Rias called out to her queen, still without turning her head away from the black-cloaked man. The long black-haired young woman with violet eyes giggled sadistically as she used her lightings to destroy the wand as it was flying in the air thanks to its owner releasing it due to Kaneko's punch. The black-cloaked man, who was groaning in pain and catching his breath, stared at this with shock and horror. "My wand! You freaks! Disgusting sacks of waste air!" The Death Eater roared in fury as he glared daggers at them. "Enough!" Sona hissed sternly as she released a bit more of her devilish aura, which caused the man to stop his tirade to stare at her with a pale sweating face. "Kiba, knock him down," Rias ordered to her blonde knight as herself accidentally released more of her aura. However, the knight didn't have to move as suddenly, the man fell forward face first into the ground. What happened, you may ask? Harry was standing behind the unconscious form of the Death Eaters with a glare that could melt ice. He had earlier felt the portals opened by Rias and Sona and had silently approached them as his friends confronted his stalker, who was confirmed to be a man by the voice. He had growled a bit when the man called his friends muggles, but had been amused by him when he pulled out his little stick. Harry became even more amused when Kaneko punched the man in the guts and had almost laughed at the face the man made when Akeno destroyed his wand with her lightings. However, he became enraged when the man started to insult his friends and girlfriend in his anger, so he used his opportunity to knock him down as Rias ordered Kiba to do it. Back to present, Harry stared with disgust at the unconscious body of the Death Eater he knocked down before spitting in anger. "No one insults my friends." Smiling at the green-eyed young lord, the Gremory heiress then became cold as she stared at the body laying on the ground. "Issei, Kiba, tie this thing," Rias hissed at her knight and pawn with disgust as she stared down at the unconscious body. The two instantly nodded at their king before approaching the Death Eater to attach him with ropes Tsubaki somehow summoned for them. "Era Harry-kun, I love it when you act tough," Akeno replied seductively as she winked at her lover while licking her lips. "I would do anything to please you, dear," Harry cooed back to Rias' queen, who blushed slightly at the answer while having dirty thoughts of him and her in bed. "Anyway?" Sona quickly inquired in a somewhat loud tone in an attempt to prevent the lovers from talking again before adding in her normal tone. "What should we do now? Should we take him to your home, Peveril-san, or we take him in the underworld? How many times did I told to simply call me Harry?" The black-haired green-eyed young lord inquired to the Citri heiress in what sounded like a whining tone, which caused many to chuckle or giggle in amusement. Sona, however, smirked at him and Harry shot her a small glare as he understood that she was simply doing this on purpose to annoy him as much as possible. "And to answer your question, heiress Citri, I think the underworld would be a better place, because if he wakes up in my home, he can memorize the area and later creates a port key to the exact location even without knowing my address," Harry replied in a serious tone while putting a strong emphasis on heiress Citri to annoy Sona back. Sona's eyes twitched in annoyance at the mention of her title but didn't say anything as Rias spoke. Well, then we can always take this trash to my family's home. I'm sure they would want to be around as we kindly speak to our new guest. An evil smirk had grew on Rias' face as spoke the last sentence, and slowly more and more of the group started to have the same expression on their faces. Why? Because ever since Harry told his past to the Grimoires and Lucifers, they wanted nothing more than to destroy the wizarding world and torture those who wronged the young lord. Venelana Grimoire, Rias' mother, was really attached to Harry, and even her husband had been shocked by the amount she released when she heard of how he was treated by his own family. Well, then it is decided. Let's go to the underworld. Rias inquired with some excitement. Her relation with her parents, as the time passed, became better and better, but she was still a bit cold toward her father, as he was the one who created this marriage contract with Riser Phoenix / chicken brain / frying turkey. Her mother and her had a stronger relationship, but less that before this whole fiasco. However, before the redhead or Sona had the chance to open their respective portals, Harry quickly stopped them by crying out. Wait! Huh? Rias and Sona both asked dumbly as they looked at him questioningly. We cannot just torture the prisoner without having the rest of our friends present, can we? Harry asked them with a dark grin. After a few seconds of incomprehension, the two kings grinned back at him as they understood what he meant. However, a slight doubt passed through a certain black-haired girl with glasses. That's fair. However, I'm sure Yasaka-sama and Gabriel-san wouldn't be there after all. Gabriel-san is an angel, she cannot come into the underworld, Sona inquired with a frown. Well, it doesn't hurt to ask Yasaka at least, Harry replied with a soft shrug before saying in a softer tone. Expecto Patronum. From the tip of his fingers, a gigantic spectral lion came out before running around the group, circling them for a few seconds. Then it stopped right next to Harry, who glanced at his Patronus before saying, Go tell Yasaka that we caught an English wizard following me and that we are currently interrogating him in the underworld. The spectral lion nodded its large head, but before it could leave to do its mission, Harry added in a serious tone. And then go look for my mother and Aunt Mu Heaven and tell them the same words when this is done, look for Kuroka, Tiamat and Ophis. As Harry and his Patronus were talking, some of the devils were staring at the Patronus with amazement. After all, it wasn't every day that he used this spell, so to see it right now was breathtaking. Gasper and Asia were staring at the spectral lion with stars in their eyes, and even Tsubaki was just as amazed. Rossweiss herself was curious about this spell, as she had never seen such a thing before and couldn't help but staring at the spectral lion with bewilderment. Nodding again to its summoner, the large spectral lion disappeared in thin air with a soft roar. Thankfully, Sona had placed a barrier around them so the passing people wouldn't see them use magic or whatever was not common. The group all watched the spectral lion leaving the area before they all looked back at Harry, whose eyes were now glued on the unconscious form of the Death Eater. You might wonder why he hadn't called for the Pendragon siblings. Because he knew that they were busy today, so he didn't want it to bother his cousins. The young lord was angered by the fact that his relatively peaceful was about to change, as he now had to face his past again. A past he wished to forget ever since his Aunt Muerte saved him from the Dursleys and the cursed wizarding world's stupidity. As he stared at the unconscious body of the man who spied on him since this morning, Harry couldn't help but wondering if it wasn't another one of his beloved Aunt Destiny's wonderful plots for him. After all, being the primordial deity of fate, it wasn't impossible that she might be the one behind this. At the same time, elsewhere, Destiny, who was watching one of her favorite anime, Akame ga Kill, suddenly sneezed as if someone was talking or thinking bad about her. Back to the park, Harry was pulled out of his thoughts when a soft hand gently pushed his head away from the Death Eater's unconscious body to make him look at the hand's owner, Akeno, whose face was filled with concern as her violet eyes stared at her lover. Are you alright, Harry-kun? She asked him softly, and she blinked in surprise when she received a tender kiss on the lips in response. I am fine, Akeno. Now I think it's time for us to go, Harry said as he turned his head slightly to stare at a certain redhead who nodded with a look of seriousness on her face. Rias then looked at the others, who all nodded their heads before glaring at the Death Eater's unconscious form. I will go fetch my Wani-san, she might want to be there as well for the meeting, Sona inquired in a stern but calm tone before she and Tsubaki disappeared through a purple devilish circle to look for the Mao Leviathan and Harry's other lover. Well then here we go. Rias called out as she and her peerage, along with Harry all passed through a familiar red circle summoned by the redhead to their next destination, Gremory Mansion. How Gremory Mansion looked like, you might wonder. Well, here is the answer to your thoughts. The layout outside of the mansion was a quadrangle with a courtyard in the middle. Outside, at the entrance, was a fountain with a circular flower bed surrounding it, with many gardens in the surrounding areas. The moment they landed on the courtyard, the mansion's front doors opened to reveal Lord and Lady Gremory themselves, who both harbored soft smiles on their faces as they stared at the group. Mother, father, Rias greeted her parents with a respectful bow and a soft tone, while being her whole peerage bowed for their king's parents. Harry, for his part, waited for them to saw him as he was towered over their prisoner, still unconscious. Daughter, welcome home. Zeoticus Gremory greeted his daughter with a soft smile, while still pained as he did heard the barely noticeable cold tone Rias used to greet him. Rias-chan. I'm so happy to have you here. Venelana Gremory greeted her daughter as she pulled the latter into a motherly hug, something Rias wholeheartedly returned. Smiling at the scene, albeit feeling like having thorn in his heart, Zeoticus turned his head away from his wife and daughter to stare into the eyes of a certain black-haired green-eyed young man. Lord Peveril. Welcome in my domain. Lord Gremory greeted Harry in a respectful and friendly tone just as Venelana pulled herself away from her daughter to approach the two. Lord Gremory, Lady Gremory, Harry greeted Rias' parents just as respectfully. Lord Peveril. It is delightful to see you again. Lady Gremory inquired warmly to the young lord as she smiled at him. The pleasure is mine, milady, Harry replied back with a small bow which caused the brown-haired Gremory's smile to widen a bit. However, before she had the chance to say something, the sound of someone clearing its throat caught their attention, and they turned around to see Lord Gremory standing in front of the unconscious body of the Death Eater they captured. Lord Peveril, Rias-chan, care to tell us why there is a tied man on the ground? Zeoticus asked the two as he glanced at the man with a frown of confusion. It is the reason of our presence here, father. This thing is a wizard from England who had been caught spying on Harry, Rias responded to her father with a sneer of disgust as she glared at the unmoving body. At the words, wizard, and England, Lord and Lady Gremory froze on the spot with looks of stupor and shock on their faces before it turned into scowls. Venelana Gremory glared down at the man with nothing but hatred. She had grown to hate English wizards ever since Harry told them what the wizarding world of Great Britain did to him and what they planned for him. Zeoticus Gremory himself was glaring at the unconscious body as he too grew to dislike wizards from England. The story of how the wizarding world was governed and by what type of people was now really new to him, and, while he might be a devil, he had more tolerance regarding the other creatures roaming Earth. And why did you bring him here? Zeoticus asked his daughter with narrowed eyes as he still wanted to know why Rias would take a wizard here of all place. We thought that we could gain some informations out of him and not risk having him warning his comrades from England, Rias answered back in a stern tone as she glanced at the unmoving body with disgust. And beside, I'm sure some devils would love to have a test subject at disposal, Harry replied with an evil grin as he looked at Rias' parents. Blinking in surprise at the young lord's unexpected words, the faces of Zeoticus and Venelana Gremory soon turned more mischievous and dark as they seemed to understand where Harry was getting at. Very well, follow me, Lord Gremory inquired somberly to his guests as he made his way back inside, quickly followed by his wife who was cackling like a mad scientist. Scary, Issei commented softly from his place near Kiba, who nodded in agreement while staying silent. With a sigh, Harry used a spell of levitation to carry the unconscious body of the knocked-down Death Eater as he too went after Lord and Lady Gremory, walking side by side with Rias as the rest of the group walked behind them in silence but all eager to hear and see what would happen to the wizard. Zeoticus led the group toward what looked like a dark room filled where at the center was a chair filled with devilish chains. Tie him there. Lord Gremory ordered / inquired the group as they circled the chair in question. Nodding, Harry conjured his spell and the body fell on the chair. Quickly, Kiba and Issei rushed forward to tie the man's legs and hands. Once it was done, the two backed away and all stared at the Death Eater with stern, serious expression on their faces along with some glee. Now who should have the honor to wake him from his nap? Rias asked everyone with a dark grin. It should be Onizen. Asia cried out with an eye-closed smile before blushing in embarrassment when everyone turned their eyes to look at the former nun. Ms. Argento isn't wrong, this thing had been spying on Lord Peveril ever since this morning, so it should be fair that he was the one to wake him up, Rosweiss explained with a soft tone as she looked at her king and the Gremory patriarchs. However, before anyone could say something, a new voice, a masculine one, echoed from nearby, catching their attention. The Valkyrie is right. Turning their heads, they saw Surzex Lucifer himself entering the room alongside Sona, her peerage, and a certain Leviathan who looked at everyone for a moment before her eyes landed on a certain young lord with green emerald eyes. Harry-chan. She called out with ravishment as she lunged at him, tackling him. Sarah Fall. It's good to see you, but please let me up. Harry replied to Sona's sister as she hugged him tightly. Nope. Won't happen. You're cuddly. The Leviathan responded as she nuzzled his chest affectionately like a cat would. Harry sighed as he gently patted the top of her head with his right hand. She was just too cute for her own good, like Asia in fact, except that Seraphol was practically an adult with the mentality of a child. Seraphol, he called gently his childish girlfriend, but then. I told you to call me Leviathan. The Leviathan replied with a hiss and an adorable pout on her face. Harry gave her a "Are you serious?" look before sighing deeply as he ignored the amused looks he got from the people present here. All right, Leviathan, can you please let me up? He asked her with a bit of annoyance mixed with amusement. When she heard how he called her, the anger and annoyance of Seraphol's face quickly faded like ice under sun as it was instead replaced with a bright smile and a happy expression. Okay, she cried out with joy as she released her grip on him, allowed the poor guy to slowly go back on his feet while glaring daggers at her innocent face. Sorry to interrupt this amusing scene, but I think we have business to attempt, Surzex inquired with a small grin toward Harry and Seraphol, which caused everyone to snicker in amusement while the young lord glared at him, unamused. Do I have something on my face, Harry-kun? Surzex asked Harry with an impish grin as he looked at the annoyed young lord. F off, Lucifer, Harry grumbled with annoyance and loud enough for the entire room to hear, which caused a wave of laughers to echo in the area. Then they all stopped when a familiar spectral lion came into the room with a loud roar to announce its arrival. Lord Gremory, his wife, Lucifer and Seraphol all readied themselves in case the spectral feline tried something, but instead, it seemed to ignore everyone as it stopped right in front of Harry with a piece of paper between its jaws. The young lord gently picked the piece of paper from the feline, who looked one more time at Harry before disappearing in thin air, leaving nothing behind. Ignoring the shocked looks from Surzex, Venelana, Zeoticus and Seraphol, Harry carefully read what was written on the paper, and once he was done, he sighed deeply with a hint of disappointment before announcing. It's Yasaka. From what is written here, she cannot come as she had to present a meeting with her advisors. As he said this, Harry couldn't help but being a bit sad that Yasaka wasn't here for the questioning, but he could understand as she had duties to perform. Being the leader of a faction, she had a lot of responsibilities. However, he was quickly pulled out of his thoughts when a new portal appeared in thin, where stepped out 3 angry women. Who were those women? 3 of Harry's girlfriends, Kuroka the Nekashu, Tiamat the Chaos Karma Dragon, and finally, Ophis the Infinite Dragon God. At the sight of the dragons, the devils all took a step back, as no one wanted to anger one of them, especially Ophis, who was after all more than capable of ending their life right there. Speaking of which, the moment her eyes landed on the young lord, Ophis's anger softened a bit as she approached along with Kuroka and Tiamat, whose faces turned softer at the sight of Harry. Of course, the trio, as if they were one, lunged at him, and the poor green-eyed young man himself being hugged by 3 of his girlfriends before Akeno and Seraphol joined in. How are you, Harry-kun? Tiamat asked her mate with a warm expression on her face as she kissed his left cheek affectionately. I would be better if you can let me breath. Harry cried out in response, but it was muffled by Kuroka as she shoved his head between her melons. Did you say something, dear Naya? The black-haired Nekashu teasingly asked, as she knew he couldn't answer due to his current predicament. Era, don't hog him all to yourself, Kuroka-san. Akeno inquired her HRM sister with a soft pout as she quickly pulled Harry into an equal embrace, shoving his face between her own melons. Speaking of Harry, he was becoming red because of the lack of air, and he waved his arms desperately to show them his current state. Thankfully, his salvation came in the form of a certain blonde nun who was nothing but kindness and innocence incarnate. Akeno-senpai? I don't think Onaizen can breathe anymore, Asia inquired to the older girl with a look of concern as she looked at her brother figure. Blinking, Rias Queen glanced down at her boyfriend before pulling his head out of her melons. Harry gasped loudly as he tried to take in as much air as possible while his face was as red as Rias' hair. The rest of the hug-givers stepped away from him as he caught his breath. Sorry dear Hihi, Akeno apologized to her boyfriend as she rubbed the back of her head with embarrassment. I'm sorry as well sweetie Naya, Kuroka added as a sweat drop fell on her forehead while Kaneko was shooting her a small glare at almost killing her Otoko. Well, Onaizen now that Harry was with her sister. It's okay, just don't do this again, Harry mumbled at them before adding to himself, almost killed by 2 pair of melons, what a good way to die. Oh man. I'm so jealous. Why can't a girl do this to me? Issei cried out in despair and disappointment as he would have loved to be at Harry's place. Everyone stared at him with either disgust, annoyance, or blankly as sweat drops fell from their foreheads. But before someone could voice what she had in mind, Kaneko and Zenobia quickly acted. The blue-haired former exorcist slapped the back of his head while the white-haired Nekasho punched him in the guts. Thank you, Harry said to the 2 girls with a grin on his face as he stared at a groaning Issei. Hate pervs, Kaneko grumbled softly but loud enough for him to hear while Zenobia only nodded at him. However, Kaneko's face brightened when a bag of sweets was handed to her by Harry, who harbored a gentle smile on his face. A little something for you Kaneko, he said kindly as she picked the bag without hesitation. Arigato, the white-haired Nekasho replied as she gave him a brief hug before backing away to start munching on some of the sweets. Chuckling in amusement, Harry's attention suddenly went back to the 3 newcomers when Ophis stepped forward with a serious expression that sent shivers down some people's spines. Apparently you were followed by a wizard today? The infinite dragon asked him with narrowed eyes. Where is he? Is that him? Tiamat asked him the moment he was about to answer to Ophis as her eyes landed on the unconscious body on the chain-filled chair. Yes it is, we were about to wake him when you came, Surzex replied in a nervous tone as he stared at the dragons. Who wouldn't be when you have Ophis herself around, as she was one of the strongest beings in existence. Nodding at the Mao Lucifer, she suddenly turned her head toward another part of the room with her usual bored expression on her face. Wondering what she was watching, some of the people present glanced toward where she was looking only to see 2 people stepping out of 2 portals. Those people were more than familiar to Harry as they were none other than Esh, primordial deity of life, and her sister, Muerte, primordial deity of death. At the sight of the 2, many people except Ophis and Harry bowed at them as they were after all primordial deities. Esh, however, was focused on one particular being in the room and she made her way toward him with open arms. Harry chuckled under his beard as he hugged his mother. It was nice to be held by his mother as he felt her chin resting at the top of his head while feeling her hands caressing his back. Hello son, Esh greeted her little one with a honey-like tone filled with maternal love. Hello mom, Harry greeted her back with a soft smile before he turned his head to greet the second deity approaching him, Hey Aunt Mu. Hello dear nephew, Muerte greeted the young lord with a kiss on the forehead and a hand ruffling his dark hair. Harry grumbled at the action but brushed it aside when he saw the serious expressions they both now harbored on their faces. Where is the wizard? Muerte asked her nephew in a tone filled with disgust and coldness. A coldness that sent shivers down everyone's spines. Esh looked just as emotionless as her eyes held nothing but anger and maternal fury. For a deity of life who usually radiated warmth and kindness, it was terrifying. No surprise the 2 were sisters it seems. Bonded and ready to be interrogated. Harry replied with a grin while meeting their eyes with a somewhat pleading as if he was yelling, don't kill him yet. Good, Muerte and Esh both said at the same time while still glaring at the Death Eater's unconscious form. Speaking of which, where is Aunt Destiny? Harry asked the two in an attempt to distract them while curious of his other aunt's location. She is still in her domain, Muerte replied with a glint of playfulness in her eyes. And probably watching her favorite anime, Esh added in equal deviousness. Which is? Harry asked the two with a raised brow. He knew Muerte watched the anime Sailor Moon, but to hear that his other aunt watched anime was a surprise. Akane ga kill. The two sisters replied at the same time with grins on their faces. Somewhere, Destiny had the sudden envy to punch and curse her sisters. For some reasons, as she felt like she was being made fun of. Harry stared at the two sisters with a deadpan expression on his face as he glanced back and forth between the two of them. After a few seconds, he released a deep breath while shaking his head with amusement and a bit of exasperation. Great, both my aunts are Japanophiles, let's hope Mom is not, or else I'm cursed, Harry thought to himself as he stopped shaking his head to look at his mother Ash. Please tell me you don't watch anime like Aunt Muerte or Destiny. The young lord asked the primordial deity of life almost pleadingly. However, before Ash got the chance to answer, two feminine voices stopped her. And what is wrong with watching anime? Muerte and Rias both asked him at the same time with a look of offense on their faces as their hands were on their hips in a serious manner. Nothing. I'm just curious, that's all. Harry hurriedly inquired, waved his hands in an attempt to defend himself as he didn't want it to anger the two Japanophile who were glaring daggers at him. Of course as Japanophiles would unite with each other. DMNIT. Esh, thinking it was time to save her son from her sisters and the redhead's wrath, gently patted the top of Harry's hair before sternly looking at the two glaring girls who instantly stopped what they were doing under the glare they received from the primordial deity of life. Alright, that enough, you two. He just asked me a question. I'm sure he didn't meant to offense you two. Am I right, son? Esh asked Harry, who quickly nodded his head while glancing at Rias and Muerte, whose eyes narrowed at him. But then the two stopped when they received another dangerous glare from the primordial deity of life, who affectionately ruffled the top of her son's head. Harry blushed a bit in embarrassment as he sent small glares toward the other people still in the room, who all seemed amused by what was going on. Now to answer you, son, I do watch anime from time to time, Desh answered to her son once she stopped glaring at her sister and Rias. At those words, Harry silently cursed himself for his previous thoughts. He should have learned by now that everything he would say would end happening. Now wonder himself, like Japan so much, like mother, like son. Which one in particular? Harry asked her with resignation, but still a bit curious about what his mom would watch on TV. Hearing the question caused Esh to instantly blush in embarrassment as she slightly turned her head away from him. Seeing this, Muerte grew a devious smirk on her face as she saw an occasion to tease her beloved red-haired sister some more. Still smirking, the primordial deity of death opened her mouth to answer Harry's question. Well, dear nephew of mine, Esh here really like one of the most classic anime ever created. The primordial deity of life sent a small embarrassed glare toward her sister, who sent her a small smirk before resuming her answer. She loves Saint Seiya. Elsewhere, Destiny suddenly felt like she was missing a perfect opportunity to tease one of her sisters. Blinking, Harry stared at his aunt for a few seconds before looking back at his mom, whose face was hidden behind her hands. He wasn't the only surprise though, as many looked in her direction with bewilderment, especially Rias, whose eyes shined with delight as she stared at the red-haired primordial deity. A part of Sailor Moon, Saint Seiya from Masami Kurumada was one of her favorite anime, and she would sometimes watch some episodes when no one was around with her. As if it wasn't enough, she wasn't the only one present to like this anime. Harry also enjoyed it greatly, especially since one day, back when he was only 10 years old, somebody left the whole adventures of Zodiac Knights on his bed, and being the child he was, he read them all. He had always wondered who left him the manga for him to read, and now he got his answer. Now I know where I got my love for Saint Seiya from, Harry grumbled softly to himself as he shot a knowing look at his mom, who winked at him deviously. Sighing deeply, the young lord shook his head to regain his composure before looking serious again. Alright, Anime and Japanophiles aside, Harry began to say, which earned him some glares from Rias and Muerte and a stern look from his mother before adding just as serious, we still have a English possible Death Eater to interrogate. Some people chuckled at his rectification as they all understood what he meant except Asia and Gasper, as they were the youngest of them, even if Kaneko was as old as the two. However, the amusement quickly faded as they all heard a groan coming from nearby and they turned their heads to see their soon-to-be victim slowly waking up. Well, look at that sleeping beauty, has finally decided to mingle back with the commoners. Muerte inquired teasingly as she looked at everyone. Those who caught the line started to laugh with humor while the others blinked in confusion. Even Harry rolled his eyes in amusement as he recognized the final part of the sentence as one of a movie character's best punchlines. "Ow, where am I?" the slowly waking man asked with a groan. The moment they heard the man's voice, Esh and Muerte went to hide among the shadows, as they weren't supposed to be seen by humans in general, but they would still be around to listen to what will be said next. "In hell." Surzex and Lord Gremory both said at the same time with grins on their faces. Hearing the strange voices, the Death Eater suddenly opened his eyes wide to stare at the people surrounding him. For a moment we could see the nervousness and slight fear from his eyes, but then, when they landed on Harry, the fear turned into anger as his eyes narrowed at the young lord. "Potter!" He snarled at Harry with a sneer of disgust on his face, momentarily forgetting that there were more people present. Suddenly, a strong killing attempt spread through the air, and even the dark-cloaked man stopped his glare as he stared in fright at the young man whose emerald eyes were now glowing with powers. Thankfully, Harry decided it was best to hide his full aura, so he released only a small parcel of it. "I am not a Potter. I will never be a Potter. I am Lord Harry Peveril Gryffindor Ravenclaw Slytherin Emery's Lefay." Harry snarled in anger using his famous growl-like voice. The same one he usually used when he was in his man-beast form or his Werlion form. Around him, a lot of people except Ophis, Esh, Muerte, Akeno and Tiamat backed away in fright as the last time they saw him angry, well, let's just say it wasn't pretty. Even the Death Eater was now paling drastically as his eyes widened with terror. However, at the mention of Slytherin, his face regained his colors as he sneered at the young. "How dare you? You cannot be Lord Slytherin, you disgusting half-breed. The Dark Lord is." The cloaked man hissed arrogantly and angrily at the young man before him. Suddenly, more killing attempts stopped him when the Death Eater was about to say more, and he glanced around to see that the other people present were all glaring at them angrily while looking ready to tear him apart if he dared to say more. "Sadly for you, I am. I gained it by right of conquest. Beside, the lord you are revering so much is no better than me, as he himself is just a disgusting half-breed." Harry sneered back at him with a devious grin on his face. Once again, the reaction was predictable. "Liar! The Dark Lord is a pure blood. How dare you? Insular RRGH." The Death Eater began to rant in anger before being interrupted by a certain black-haired young woman with violet eyes who's just used her lightnings for her. "Thank you, Akeno," Harry thanked his girlfriend with a soft smile on his face. "Always a pleasure, Harry-kun fufufu," Akeno replied back to her lover with a sadistic giggle just as the man groaned in pain. "You will pay for th dash," the Death Eater painfully mumbled to the violet-eyed young woman before he was stopped by Lord Lucifer, who released his full aura on him, shutting him up in the process. "She will nothing human." Surzex snarled at the cowering man as he stood before him. "Now you better tell us who you are and what are you doing here?" Lord Gremory asked to the chained cloaked man as he approached his son while also releasing a bit of his aura to intimidate him. Glancing back and forth between the two crimson-haired men standing in front of him, the Death Eater gulped nervously as he never felt such a power before. Even Potter seemed as strong, if not a bit stronger, than the two men before him. But then he shook his head to regain his composure, as in his head, no one is stronger than Lord Voldemort. "I have nothing to tell you. I don't know what you are, but you cannot be human. I don't answer to freaks like you all," the Death Eater snarled at the people gathered around him. Before paling immensely when the killing attempts from earlier grew even more to the point of almost suffocating him. You shouldn't have done that, Harry inquired to him in a fake sympathetic tone before adding with a dark smirk. Because now you are on the way for a big world of pain and suffering. The Death Eater, who had turned his attention away from the glaring people to stare at him, grew rebellious as he sneered arrogantly at the young lord in front of him before saying, "And what will they do? They cannot hurt a pure-blood wizard like myself. We are the strongest beings in the world." However, when he finished his sentence, he was greeted by something he hadn't thought would happen. They all laughed except Ophis, who only smirked darkly at him as if he said something stupid. Even Harry joined him as he had never heard something so hilarious until now. The same could be said to Esh and Muerte, who were both laughing as well at the wizard's stupidity. "What are you freaks all laughing at? Answer me," the Death Eater hissed angrily at the laughing people around him. The gathered people took their times to catch their breaths, but when they did, their expressions turned serious again. "We are all laughing because of what you just said," Tiamat began to say with a dark look on her face. Claiming that wizards are the strongest beings in the world, Rias and Sona both said at the same somberly before blinking at each other with surprise at the unexpected action. "When it is not the case." Ophis hissed in disgust as her eyes narrowed at the chained man while black snakes could be seen coiling around her arms. The Death Eater opened his mouth to say something when Harry stopped him from doing so. "How?" "By giving him a fair warning. If I were you, I would not aggravate the situation." Of course, as expected, the black-cloaked man sniffed in disgust at the young man as he gave the latter an arrogant look on his face. "I don't take the words of a half-BLD, Potter." The word was filled with disgust, loathing, and anger as if he was talking to a vermin. Suddenly, he blinked in shock when long sharp claws like nails appeared inches away from his eyes and slightly looked up to see an angered black-haired young woman with hazel golden eyes. He then noticed the fact that she had a pair of black cat-like ears at the top of her head and wanted to sneer at her in disgust when he saw the glare she was giving him. "Insult my lover one more time and I will not hesitate to skin you alive." Kuroka menaced him threateningly as her claws shined inches away from his eyes. "Count me in too." Akeno, Ophis, Tiamat, Seraphol and some other people, Kaneko, Issei, Kiba, Zenobia, Rias, Sun, Rosweiss, Venelana, Tsubaki, Esh, Muerte etc. inquired with determination as they took a step forward in a menacing manner. "Thanks guys," Harry said to the group with a soft smile as his heart once again melted at how much they cared for him. "Always a pleasure, love," Tiamat replied to him before kissing him on the cheek. "Don't hog him all to yourself." Kuroka hissed at the Chaos Karma Dragon as she kissed him right on the other cheek. "I was about to say the same thing." Akeno and Seraphol said at the same time as they approached them before kissing Harry on his cheeks in perfect synchronization. When they finished, Ophis made her way toward her mate with a neutral expression on her face as if she wasn't bothered by the fact she wasn't the one to kiss him first before pulling him into a passionate kiss on the lips. Blinking at the sudden action, Harry slowly returned the kiss and we could hear Ophis a bit in delight as she felt him deepening the kiss, ignoring the jealous glares she was receiving from the rest of her HRM sisters. After all, she was Harry's first girlfriend, so it was normal for her to kiss him first. Around them, the other people present all blushed a bit at what was going on. Even if some of the girls and Issei looked a bit jealous as they hoped to find a boy capable to kiss them like this. The adults all smiled with affection at the kissing couple and the hidden deities were doing the same from the shadows of the room. However, the tender moment was broken by a sneer of disgust coming from a certain dark-cloaked chained man who couldn't retain himself despite having been warned against it. "Look at that, the Potter boy has a HRM. Can't act like a civilized man, it seems. But then again, he is nothing more than a disgusting half-BLD. Barely better than dirt under the shoes of us, proper wizards," the man hissed in disgust to Harry before looking at the girls with him and adding. "And look at those girls. Clothed like delinquents. Where's the lot of you? Enough." Harry roared in anger with a growl-like tone as his eyes glared daggers at the chained man. "First, you call me a Potter when I'm not one. Second, you don't only insult me but my family. I tried my best to control myself but you went too far," the young lord explained firmly to the Death Eater, who paled when the speaker used an intimidating voice. However, it seemed that wizards weren't known for their intellect, because a second later, the sneer returned on the man's face. "And what will you do about it, half-breed?" The Death Eater hissed at him challengingly, as he thought that nothing could hurt a pure-blood wizard like himself. However, he was disturbed by the grin he received from say half-breed. "Let me show you," Harry answered darkly as his body started to shift right before the eyes of everyone present. The chained man stared in disbelief and shock when he saw the young man's skin darkening to becoming as black as night as fur started to appear on it. Harry's body grew a bit as his hands turned into clawed ones while a tail appeared from his backside. His hair grew to look like a mane as it went all the way down his way to stop right above where the tail's base. As if it wasn't enough, the Death Eater could see the young man's face also changing. His canines turned sharper and his eyes turned more feline-like, while his ears became pointier like those of an elf. The face itself stayed human but turned as black as the fur covering the rest of the body. Once the transformation was over, the chained man stared in terror at the 2 meters tall feline-like humanoid standing in front him. He had never seen anything like this creature before, and as the majority of people in the wizarding world, he had lessons about magical creatures when he was still a student at Hogwarts. However, his thought quickly disappeared when he saw the man-beast slowly making his way toward him in an intimidating manner. Sweat started to fall from his forehead when the black man-beast's clawed hands turned into fists, as the look in those emerald-green feline-like eyes turned more feral. That could only meant one thing: it would be violent. "You know, I always wanted a punch bag to train on, and thanks to you I finally got one," the Dark Lion Man inquired sadistically as he stopped right in front of the chained Death Eater, whose face was now really pale. At this sight, Harry's mad grin widened even more as he rose a fist ready to strike his opponent, as some lightnings could be seen cracking around his arm, much to the man's horror. However, before he had the chance to punch the chained man, someone stopped him by grabbing his tail. Yelping in both protestation and anger, as he hated when people do this, he turned around to face whoever did this, only to stop when he saw it was none other than Akeno, who smiled at him. "Sorry, Harry Cohen, while I would love to see you torture him, we still need him." Of course, as she said this, it was easy to pick up the disappointment in her tone, as, being A.S.N.M., she loved to see people in pain, or being the one to give them pain or to receive pain. Harry opened his mouth to say something, but someone beat him to it in the form of Sirzex Lucifer. "She is right, Harry, we still need to interrogate him," the crimson-haired Mao inquired to the young lord with a serious expression on his face. Seeing that he was hesitating, Venolana approached him before inquiring in a motherly tone, "Please just calm down." Glancing around, Harry saw that many people present were in agreement with the Mao's words, if the nods he received were not proof enough. In addition, the looks he received from his girlfriends and Rias' mother was enough to calm him a bit, as they showed nothing but concern to him. Sighing deeply, the Black Lion Man growled one more time at the Death Eater, who cowered a bit in fright at the sound. "Fine," Harry grumbled in acceptance before turning in an attempt to walk away to stand beside his friends from Ko Academy. However, he didn't went far, as the Death Eater, in his great stupidity or pride I don't know, thought it was a good idea to say something really stupid. "You are pathetic. Not only you are a pathetic half-breed, but now you are an entire freak. I should have expected it from Dumbledore's golden boy." When the man said the word freak, Harry had stopped in his walk to grit his teeth in anger, but when the Death Eater called him Dumbledore's golden boy, his anger turned into rage, as with a roar of fury, he turned around to face the chained man, who seemed to realize that he made a mistake as he stared at the man-beast with terror. The Death Eater wasn't the only one frightened by Harry's current state, as some of the people present all backed away from him. "I am not Dumbledore's golden boy. I am not and will never be the savior of the wizarding world. The whole wizard kind can be destroyed for all I care, and I would gladly kill them all than help them against someone as pathetic as your Dark Lord." Harry snarled in pure anger to the Death Eater, who was too terrified to snap at the beast for insulting Lord Voldemort. "Now give me one reason why I shouldn't kill you." The Black Lion Man roared out as he unsheathed his claws with bared teeth, ready to lunge at the chained man. Despite the sheer terror he was feeling, the Death Eater gathered all his courage to sneer at the angered man-beast before him. "You don't have the guts to kill someone, Potter." "Oh. We will see about that. The Lion Man inquired loudly before lunging at the chained man with a roar of fury. As the man screamed in terror, he closed his eyes as he waited for the pain to come. However, after a few seconds, he was surprised to felt nothing and opened his eyes to see the man-beast being restrained by the wares he saw him with earlier as they tried their best to prevent him from killing the prisoner. Let me go. I will skin this vermin alive. I will gut him, Harry hissed at the girls as his emerald green eyes still glared daggers at the chained man who looked at him with a fearful expression. Harry, stop, a soft feminine voice laced with authority and firmness echoed from nearby, and they all turned their heads to see two figures approaching them from the shadows. Of course, a part of the chained man, they all knew who it was, and some even began to sweat as the people in question revealed their true form. The people were none other than Esh and Muerte, who were not in their human form anymore but their true one. Esh's form was tall, bigger than Harry's current height, and covered with light, and attached to her back was a pair of golden wings. On her body, we could see some plants and vines. Her green eyes shined with power as they were now green orbs without pupils. In her right hand, Esh was holding a magnificent golden spear. Like her sister, Muerte was equally in her true form, a tall dark cloaked figure with a large scythe in one of her hands as shadows surrounded her figure along with a feeling of coldness. As they approached, all could feel the power radiating from them, a power only gods could possess. The sisters, at first, wanted to stay behind and watch the interrogation, but even since the man started to insult people, their patience grew thin. It broke completely when Harry changed into his man-beast form and lunged at the man in anger. A comprehensible anger. At the sight of the two newcomers, the Death Eater paled drastically as he recognized one of them as death itself and looked around for a way to escape, but it was futile as his hands and feet were attached thanks to the chains. No. Please, it is not my time. The Death Eater screamed in fright as he trashed madly in the chair, trying to break his chains. Muerte only giggled sadistically at this, but then turned serious as she said in a cold tone, "Indeed, it is not your time." Hearing this, the chained man sighed in relief as his struggles became weakened to stop completely. Sadly for him and thankfully for the primordial deity of death, no one could see the sadistic grin she now harbored as she added in a tone filled with dark anticipation. Yet. Hearing this caused the man to pale again as he shivered in fright from the threat while staring at the dark cloaked deity with nothing but terror as once again, he glanced around to find an exit only to find none, much to his despair. You, wizards, always thought you are better than anyone on this world, but you are wrong. There are a lot of creatures out there and a lot of them are stronger than your kind. Esh sternly began to say to the prisoner with a tone that sent shivers down those who heard it. Gods, angels, devils, dragons, yukais, fallen angels, Muerte listed with coldness as she stared at the frightened mortal. Dragons? They are just mindless creatures without any intelligence. The Death Eater retorted when he heard the word dragons, but then froze as he realized that he spoke back against death itself, which would surely earn him a one-straight ticket to the afterlife. However, when those words left his mouth, he not only annoyed the deities but also angered four people in particular. Who were they? Ophis, Tiamat, Harry and Drake, of course, as all of them were dragons. What you wizards see as dragons are nothing more than wyverns. Unlike those pathetic creatures, dragons are capable of language and intelligence. Esh retorted to the chained man with gritted teeth as her eyes narrowed at him dangerously. No one insults her baby and get away with it. Even if said baby was old enough to hold his ground and was a dragon god. Speaking of Harry, he was having a hard time lunging again at the chained man who had the stupidity to insult people even if he was in trouble. Stupid purebloods inbred. He wanted nothing more than to tear the pathetic wizard in front of him, but with his girlfriend, some of them at least present, along with the kind Asia and the shy Gasper, he couldn't do it. Huffing deeply, Harry's body shifted back into his human form while his destroyed top reassembled back to his former self as if nothing happened. This display of magic shocked the Death Eater, as wandless magic was considered impossible by wizard standard. So imagine his shock when he saw the disgusting half-BLD freak performing wandless magic when his own MSTR couldn't. Ignoring the disbelief on the chained man's face, Harry took a deep breath before saying to the other present. I need some fresh air. I don't trust myself around him. The young lord had a look of pure disgust as he said the word, him. Zeoticus Gremory and Surzex Lucifer both nodded in understanding as themselves were trying their best to not destroy the thing who hadn't stopped insulting everyone ever since he woke up. Rias, Sona and their respective peerage all nodded at the young lord as themselves were disgusted by the chained man's behavior. Issei and Kaneko wanted nothing more than to punch the guy repeatedly while Zenobia and even Kiba wanted to cut him with their swords. Go Harry-kun, we will take care of him, Venelana motherly inquired to Harry before sending a dangerous glare to the Death Eater who gulped in fright at the sight of the woman glaring at him. We will go with you too. I'm sure our presence will only scare him more, Muerte inquired in a cold tone as she looked at the chained man. Esh nodded in agreement at her sister's words before looking at Harry and saying telepathically, I will see you later, son. Nodding at his mother, Harry then felt someone poking his back and turned his head to see it was none other than Seraphol, who smiled gently at him. Do you want me to teleport you back to your home, Harry-chan? She asked him gently. No thanks, I will use Hedwig, but just in case, I want to know if more people come with me. Harry answered to the Mao Leviathan before asking the question to the rest of his friends and girlfriends. I will stay back, Kuroka replied with a smirk as she glanced at the Death Eater while unsheathing her claws, making him gulp in slight fear. I will stay as well, it might be interesting, Ophis responded with her usual bored tone, even if in her eyes, we could see how much she wanted to kill the human who dared to insult her, her HRM sisters and her lover. You already know the answer, Harry Kyn Fufufu, Akeno replied with a sadistic giggle and an eye-closed smile. I have to stay behind, Harry, Seraphol replied with a disappointed tone as she wanted to have some time with her beloved boyfriend. I will come with you, Harry-kun. Ophis-san or one of the other girls will tell later, Tiamat replied with a shrug as if it wasn't a big deal. Can I come too? Asia asked her brother figure with her cute puppy eyes. Me too. Gasper asked Softy while using the same technique that the blonde former nun. Harry smiled at them tenderly before using his hands to ruffle both of their heads with affection. Why not? But you have to ask Riri's permission, as she is your king after all. I told you to stop calling me Riri. Rias cried out loudly to him with annoyance as streams could be seen coming out of her ears. Harry sent her a small smirk as he wasn't impressed in the slightest, which caused the Gremory heiress to pout at him in greater annoyance. I hate you, Harry, but yes, they can go with you, Rias inquired to him with glaring at him. They all knew that Rias and Gasper were really sensitive and what they were about to do was not for people like them, so it was comprehensible that she would allow them to go. Thank you, Bucho. Gasper and Asia said at the same time with bright smiles, which caused the redhead to smile tenderly at them as she replied back gently. No problem. Smiling at the nice scene, Harry then called out loudly, Hedwig. At those words, the white royal phoenix appeared in a burst of flame, showing herself in all her glory while thrilling loudly to announce her arrival. At the sight of the bird, the Death Eater paled drastically as he stared in shock at the BRT he looked for. Not many people could say they owned a phoenix, and the only one who could was none other than Albus Dumbledore, the Mudblood's lover. The old fool was the only one who owned such a beast, and now they were another one right in front of him. But then thoughts entered his mind, why the BRT would own a phoenix when he looked ready to kill him earlier. After all, phoenixes were creatures of the light, so it doesn't make sense. Back to present, the newcomer circled the group, thrilling Softy in a greeting manner. Hedwig. Gasper and Asia both cried out at the same time with delight as they looked at the noble bird who thrilled at them loudly in response. Hello, girl. Can you take us back to Peveril Manor? You will have a lot of beacons if you do. Harry inquired warmly to the circling bird, who seemed even more enthusiastic, maybe at the prospect of her favorite snacks being given to her. Without warning, Hedwig flied right toward Harry, Gasper, Asia and Tiamat, who barely had the time to catch her tail's fathers before they all disappeared in thin air through fire. Esh stared at where her son disappeared with a calm expression before turning her head toward where the mouse, Lord and Lady Gremory stood and saying simply, Haven fun. With that said, the primordial deities disappeared through their respective portals, leaving behind their devil's friends and Ophis, who were now looking at the chained man with sadistic grin on their faces, which caused the same man to sweat profusely as he glanced at the people gathered around him nervously. Time skip. As the moon was shining up in the black sky, inside Peveril Manor, Harry was sitting on his favorite chair as around him, gathered around the dining table, his friends were all watching him with serious expression on their faces. They arrived from the underworld a few moments ago after 2 hours of interrogation. The young lord had to grew the table a bit as there were a lot of people present: Rias, Sona, Tsubaki, Asia, Kaneko, Akeno, Kuroka, Tiamat, Gasper, Rosweiss, Zenobia, Issei, Kiba, Ophis, Esh, Ravel, Arthur, Lufei, Seraphol, Gabriel, Kunu and Yasaka. The Kitsunes arrived an hour ago through port keys that were given to them some times ago by Harry, as the latter didn't want them to pay a lot for train traveling. Needless to say, the first thing Yasaka did when Harry opened the front door was kissing the hell out of him. Speaking of which, it took him a few minutes after Hedwig took him back home to calm down, as he was really angry at the man for what he said to his friends and family. But thanks to Tiamat, Asia, Hedwig, Gasper and his mom's help, he managed to regain his composure enough to forget the man's words. When Yasaka and her daughter arrived at the manor, Harry told the former about what happened in the underworld, while Kunu went to play games with Gasper and Asia, while Hedwig kept an eye on them like the guardian she is. The leader of the Yukai faction had been outraged by what this wizard said about her lover, her HRM sisters, and the whole wizards are the most powerful beings things, but thanks to Harry, she calmed down pretty quickly when he gave her a tender kiss on the lips. Not long after Yasaka and her daughter arrived, someone else arrived at Peveril Manor, Gabriel, the gorgeous seraph herself. She came to visit her boyfriend, but when she heard about who they caught and what the prisoner said, well, let's just said she wasn't enchanted. An hour after Yasaka's, Kunu's and Gabriel's arrival, Rias and her peerage along with Sona, Tsubaki, Ophis, Seraphol and Kuroka appeared in the garden. They all harbored serious expression to the point of looking almost cold and murderous. When asked, Rias answered that they needed to talk now. After sending Hedwig to look for his cousins, Harry reunited everyone in the dining room, where he had to change the table to make it bigger to accommodate his guests. It didn't take long with Hedwig to come back, but a part of Arthur and Lufei, someone else arrived at the same time. As promised, it was the primordial deity of life Esh herself. Back to present, Harry glanced at everyone present before looking over at Rias and asking curiously, "Why aren't Surzex and your parents here with us?" They decided to question him a bit more, the Gremory heiress replied coldly as she mentioned the Death Eater. Nodding at the redhead in understanding, the young lord turned his emerald green eyes to Seraphol, the only Mao present, before asking in a serious tone. "So what was he doing here?" Seraphol released a soft sigh before taking a deep breath and looking back at the love of her life. "Apparently, he had been sent here by order of his lord. From what he told us, the wizarding world had looked upon every countries and had found no trace of you until now." Growls of anger could be heard echoing from a majority of the people present in this little assemble. Harry, however, looked calm and composed, but if you looked closely at his eyes, you could see how much he was angry as they narrowed slightly. "I'm sure Voldemort asked his spies to capture me," Harry grumbled angrily and with a hint of annoyance. "Why can't he be happy without having to deal with idiots from the wizarding world?" Elsewhere, a certain deity of fate sneezed loudly as she was about to eat a delicious sandwich. The sneeze caused her to drop her food, which fell on the ground, much to her horror. "Actually no, he was sent here to look for you, and if you got a glimpse of you, then he had to go back to his lord to report him your exact location," Kuroka replied with a sneer of disgust as she thought of the man they interrogated. Pinching the bridge of his nose with annoyance, Harry closed his eyes as his mind went deep in thoughts. Thankfully they managed to capture the spy, or else he would have Voldemort, his cronies and possibly the entire wizarding world on his back, and that was the last thing he wanted right now. The mere thought of facing his parents and Dumbledore again, he was sure he would just kill them on the spot for what they did to him. Maybe he would be lenient on his mother, but the other two, hell no. His thoughts then went to his brother, Jacob. From what he heard from Sirius a long time ago, the guy was as arrogant as James if no more and hadn't appreciate not being the boy who lived anymore. What else did he said? Harry asked them coldly while not reopening his eyes. Oh, a part of the occasional insults throw at us or the speech of, my lord will kill you all. Nothing, Sona replied with a hint of annoyance. Please tell me you at least have some fun in interrogating him, Harry asked them with a playful raised brow. The smirks he got on many faces were the only answers he got from the gathered people minus, Esh, Lofei, Arthur, Yasaka, Kunu, Gabriel and Tiamat. Speaking of the Pendragon siblings, they felt even more awful of how England turned out since the era of the great King Arthur but promised to stand beside their cousins even if they had to fight against fellow English people. Now what should we do? Issei asked out loud to everyone as he looked back and forth at the people gathered around him. They all turned their heads toward Harry whose face turned into a mad grin that sent shivers of pleasure down Akeno's body as he said those words. Now we plot. At those words, everyone present looked back at him with dark grins of their own except Asia, Gasper and Kunu from obvious reasons before they talked about what to do in the future about the wizarding world. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 14. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Asian Lion Heart 310 on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.